Thank you. Hello. Can everyone hear me? Yes? You have the option of like 4 other things this morning, which seem to be cooler than this. So I really thank you for showing up. That's really so hopefully I don't disappoint. So this is the title. This is really kind of what that title means from my perspective, how non-standard platforms are changing our approach to development. So just a little recap. I'm involved in all of these different businesses that do different things: South, digital marketing, SEO, community management, social media, Untold, creative technology, production, animation, and film, and Codependency, which is a software service business. So I have this great opportunity to get my hands dirty in a lot of these different things and different modes of thinking about the digital space from design and development perspective. So I want to start with talking about a little bit about trends of what I see from the front-end development world. And they're pretty straightforward. So we're starting to see this, in a way, convergence of the same type of platforms, frameworks, and technologies, where it's not so much of the Wild West when we speak about the web. We're starting to kind of see, all right, here are some go-to frameworks that I might use for specific applications, whether I'm doing mobile. Here are some areas where I might specialize or think if I'm pretty much going to stay on the web, so on and so forth. So I'm not going to really get into any code bases in this presentation, but I want to talk a lot about trends and approach, and really, I think just the role as a designer-developer as we move forward. But a couple of things we look at trends, there are 3 things that really stand out to me as we look at 2016 and moving into next year. And the sort of accumulation of all of these different frameworks and languages really leads us to how we can execute specific tasks within a mobile device, product, or web browser. So the first one is this big trend for meaningful motion. And last year at FITC, I spoke about motion, and there was a lot of topics about web animation, right? And I think we're at a point where it's less of a hype and more of it's something that we just need to do and address. And it's simply because of this fact that we have very minimal real estate to work with and a lot of information that the user wants to have access to at any given point in time. So motion, the other is stacked, the ability to layer things on top of one another, right? So we look at Flexbox and Grid and these different technologies that allow us to not just float an image to the right or left, but how we can overlap content and reveal and move things in and out, right? All of these trends sort of become commonplace. And like I said, meaningful motion, I think Google Material Design really brought this to life. And we start to look at how we can apply these little motion nuances to our experiences. And the last thing is these micro interactions. So the great tastiness is in the design details. I think the simple example is of loading a page. Instead of just clicking on an input form, typing in a search query and clicking go, simply by just dragging the natural flow of a user down, loading new content as we go. So we're going to start to discover different behaviors, even in just the platforms that we're familiar with and working in. And I'm really, really passionate about that kind of behavior dialogue. So that kind of leads me into sort of the core of this presentation. So as we look towards this year and into next year, as we make decisions of what frameworks we use or just different types of things that we want to specialize in, I'm also interested in what's happening outside of our little world of the web and app. And so it's kind of like going on the pursuit of seeing what other things are, what are areas of people challenged and faced with. And so, of course, the big thing right now is these advanced platforms. So things where we get off keyboard and mouse or off touch, and we go big, right? Touch installations, and so on and so forth. And we really start to question, as a lot of people here are actually using web technologies to build full-scale installations. WebSockets to kind of connect Internet of Things into more of a web interface because it's the technology that we're familiar with, and the adoption of that, those frameworks and languages really become powerful and applicable to these new advanced platforms. The installation you see in the back here is a touch wall built in Chrome in a web browser using JavaScript, and it was the pitch was the request from the client was, can you build a touch installation on an 85-inch touchscreen and make it respond to a 9-inch iPad? Right, so if anybody saw my talk last year, you kind of throw up in your mouth a little bit. You're like, okay, how do we do this? But the idea is that thinking about responsiveness as we look to the future is going to be more than just what are my breakpoints, what's the mobile, what's the desktop, what's the 85-inch experience, what's that VR experience? How do these things sort of work in all of these different environments as we move forward? So as we kind of look into other non-web trends, I bought a new car about 2 years ago. This is 2 years ago. And I didn't know about this sort of really cool interface element until I was in the car for about a week. And as my hand gets closer to the stereo system, there's a little gesture sensor in the front. And so as my hand gets closer, the interface changes. And so based on context, my proximity towards that specific device, it gives me a little bit more information. And this is something that's just inherent in the technology, and it's a behavior now that I just take for granted. It's quite interesting. We see this in home automation. Nest does the same thing. As my proximity gets closer to that device, the information on that screen changes. As the time of day, so on and so forth, the information changes on its own. I don't have to actually provide an input, right? It's just living my life, right? We talk about behavior, which brings us to this really cool thing. Is anybody... This slide really came after the car, because this came up last week when I was driving. Does anybody play Pokemon Go? All right. Statistically, about 1 out of 3 of you in this room play. So that seemed like right when you raised your hand. I was going to call you guys out on it. BS. You do play this game. I play it. I play it with my kids. I think it's just a really great experience. And I know generally... I just love sharing stats where I'm at. So the Canadians, 2.2 hours. Does anybody feel like they play that much a day? Definitely, right? If you got kids, for sure. But I think it's interesting stats on this is this month. So I know it hit a high peak in July, just massive boom, and now it's kind of plateauing out. But still, we're looking at millions of users in any given time. But I want to talk a little bit about this. So. The game is fun. It's great. It has this IP of Pokemon, obviously, that everybody can sort of relate to, especially if you sort of grew up in the 80s and you really were a collector, and this kind of nostalgia plays into the whole experience. But also this ability to sort of get you out of what your normal experience of sitting on a TV or at a computer and enjoying a gaming experience. You've got to get out there, right? So it's really a pivotal moment in gaming where behavior change of the gamer is essential to the gameplay in itself. And to the fact that it really is putting you can turn the augmented reality off. It's really not about that. It's about sort of going to these physical places as a way, as an input device to actually achieve something within the game experience. And I think this is really interesting. And as we look at even more core to that, sort of the business value behind this is there's a lot of different things that we can glean from it. The first is this virtual experience, I'm going to call it that even though it's augmented, can create real connections. So say, for example, if I'm a bakery owner and I just happen to be between 2 hotspots, or I create a custom lure for my restaurant, I'm actually extending this experience by using this virtual device. So, for example, if I buy a nice tasty cupcake at my bakery, and it just so happens one of my customers caught this really epic Pokemon while eating my cupcake, that cupcake's going to become a lot more memorable for that customer, right? Because it's sort of the shared experience that happens, this enhanced experience that's really interesting. So you can create these real moments by augmenting that sort of retail or that physical experience. I think there's something really interesting here that we can think about as we look towards engaging the user in more meaningful and interesting ways. Location is huge. We've seen, or I've seen, and a lot of the research I've done in sort of behavior is that there are certain locations in which this game has increased the perceived value of that physical location. So just because there is a lure there or a gym or whatever the scenario might be, in that a place that was previously not trafficked a lot seems to get more people coming to it. And so therefore the value, you call it real estate value, has increased slightly because of this virtual extension, right? I think this is quite interesting if we look at how we might augment our daily lives and how that might actually change the physical world around us from a perceived value. And then the service model. So a lot of small businesses have actually benefited from or hindered from, I don't have an image of this. Anybody seen a sign, especially in July when this thing was hitting big, where businesses would actually say, don't come in here to find Pokemon? They would actually They were annoyed by it. And I think that actually is sort of detrimental to their business, because what Pokemon Go was doing was actually getting people into their environments in ways that then they could, if they could monopolize upon that, they could actually increase revenue. So accommodate a service that maybe you don't naturally provide. Say, for example, the bakery didn't have Wi-Fi before, but they realized that there's a strong populace of people who did go there to catch, the mythical snorkel or whatever it is. Apologies for dedicated fans. That by providing free Wi-Fi, you've now given them a reason to stay a little longer, perhaps to buy some coffee, right? So actually leverage those virtual experiences to enhance profitability and value by embracing them. And I think this is an interesting context. So as I look into other trends in other areas, I look at, okay, well, how many active users this month do we see in Pokemon? About 20 million. And then, okay, well, what's comparable to that in the gaming industry? Anybody play League of Legends? Only 2, kind of. Play. You don't be shy. We're all in the nest here. We're all friends. We get this. Yeah. So, a couple of people here. At 100 million users monthly is quite substantial. So much so that it actually eclipses subscribers to Spotify and Netflix. And this is, to me, really interesting in that it's a gaming environment, obviously PC, where you're at home, right? It's not sort of comparable to that location-based. But the trend in monthly subscribers, monthly users, is growing substantially. I'm starting to see articles about will it catch up to Facebook? And to me, this is really interesting because it's not necessarily a social platform. Well, I mean, it is in that you can sort of game and play with your friends. But it's a completely different user experience, a completely different design experience from how I might engage the user, how the user might engage in that content. And this is a quote from, which I love, and I'm always reminded of the Chief Creative Officer of Sony, who the advent of user experience design in gaming is relatively a little bit newer than it is sort of in our world in the web and app development, in that it's sort of, there was this different philosophy, a different way of making game content, and that content was really hybridized with the whole front end and development process, that they were sort of one and the same, and narrative always played a leading role in it. And I love this quote. So we're really all about kind of simplifying our experiences, developing out all of the things that might feel complicated to the user and making it super easy to jump in. And I think the whole statement that from a user experience designer that having a tutorial at the beginning of your app is sort of taboo. It's like, well, if you need a tutorial to explain them how to use it, then it's not a good user experience. It's the opposite with gaming, right? It's slowly onboard them, slowly get into the process because you want them to be immersed. You want them to be engaged in the long haul and really sort of be absorbed in that experience. Not just in a moment to achieve a specific task, but to actually just be with you for a very long period of time. And so in that, you have these layers and layers of complexity that the gaming industry has really, I think, pioneered in comparison to what we're doing in the web and app world. To the level of that, when you start a game experience, it's very, very simple. But the more you play, the more you get into it, it gets actually quite complicated. This is a game, Dragon Age, for, I think, PS4 and Xbox. And there are a couple of different modalities in here that actually blow my mind. If you're sort of this little, elfish character, and you can stop, you have your teammates around you, pause, the camera freezes, you sort of go into like a bullet mode, and you can move around and assign your different characters different tasks and individual modes, and then click basically go again, and those all then execute in a single moment. And there's just this interesting power of control that the gamer has, and what interface do you need to design to actually provide that utility to the gamer is quite interesting. And then layers and layers of menu systems and customizations that I'm not going to dive into. I think it's sort of game theory and design is a whole other talk. But it's quite inspiring in how we look at the possibility, specifically in apps, right? Because apps, in my mind, are becoming much more game-like in regards to how engrossed those users are, how contained that experience is. And we're starting to challenge ourselves with how can we put more? How can we, as Pokemon Go is plateauing out, they're going to have to come out with something new to sort of boost that energy again. They're going to add more feature sets to that game to make it a little bit more interesting for those ongoing users. And so we're starting to ask okay, how do we onboard quickly, but how do we also create this very engaged experience that people are going to want to spend some time with? So I'm going to give a project example from the untold side, sort of creative technology, and with a power company, Florida Power and Light, and they tasked us with creating a hypothetical experience in which customers could be educated on how to make their home more energy efficient, right? And so it was a trade show booth experience, about a 10 by 10 kind of booth, and in the booth it had all of these smart home appliances, basically a mock kitchen. And they wanted to kind of explain, out of all of these different devices that are available today, how you can actually utilize them to save money. And really, it's just kind of this pondering question. Kevin Kelly, who sort of pioneered the Internet of Things conversation about how of space, a room generates an enormous amount of data, and how you use that data in meaningful ways to sort of influence behavior. So this is kind of a pre-visualization of what it might feel like if, you can imagine if you had the HoloLens on, but in my future world, which I'll get to in a second, those sort of cumbersome devices aren't needed, and there's ways in which to project information within a space that's meaningful in the moment that I need it. So this is a very kind of marketing-esque pre-visualization of it, but it helps kind of ask questions. So the way that we solved this was, well, really, it's a trade show booth. In a way, it's really just an engagement piece. We need some kind of screen. We need some kind of device to sort of pull them in. So we used an iPad with running Unity and QR code recognition, so that as people walked around the space, they could then trigger those graphics, those informational elements as we go off. It's not the ideal scenario, but it's a way for us to sort of perceive the future and see how we might be able to do some things. So some of the challenges, it's not a real product. We weren't asked to create something real. It's really part of a sales process to sort of engage customers as they're walking by the booth, but also educate. So we found the educational element really interesting. We knew that the space was very small and crowded. So space is a huge element. It's a huge input device. When we look at sort of all the philosophy, look at all the behaviors around interaction. We knew that the users, it was in Miami Convention Center where it started, and I think it was at a home show, where a trade show for all things about homeowners and house living. So we knew that the audience demographic was huge, ranging. There wasn't any specific person that we could target. So that's a big challenge. We knew that they weren't going to get it from the get-go. So how do we deal with that? We couldn't get, they were undecided about what washer and dryer, what fridge, what lamp, smart lamp that they were going to actually have in the booth. So we had no idea like what we were designing for. So these are really fun times. And then we had no idea what the lighting environment was going to be. So all of these things for augmented reality, if anybody who worked in this space, are really scary, really troublesome. So we do prototyping. If that video is playing over there. In which in our office we actually built physical cardboard mock-ups of these devices, and we kind of made an assumption based on the average of what a washer or dryer would be like, where the inputs would be, refrigerator, lamps, so on and so forth. And then we were able to test out kind of if I were to walk around a specific washer and dryer at any moment in time, whether based on my proximity or what I might be able to do if I'm just walking by it, what kind of information would give it to me? As I get closer, maybe it prompts up different information. So we kind of started to think about all of these really interesting things about how the input was actually the user themselves, like how in their physical proximity, and what does that mean, and how can we be meaningful in that process? So as I said before, if you're interested in playing around with it, Unity is a fantastic tool for actually mapping dimensional information. And then we used Vuforia for the QR code tracking, so we can actually marry the physical world with our virtual. And at the time we were using Unity 4.5, 5 had just come out, but we were having performance issues, specifically with Vuforia. And there's a lot of different plugins out now to actually achieve this, I think, at a higher performance rate. But we ended up using sprite sheet graphics pumped out of After Effects because we couldn't really get the fidelity of information graphics within that sort of gaming environment. And some interesting things as we get further and further into these dimensional spaces, and performance becomes a big issue. This was running off an iPad, right? So we had a lot of constraints. So I don't know if that video is playing. Yeah, so you can kind of see the experience there. It turned out really well, and there was a lot of excitement and energy around using it, and in a way, it's somewhat of a gimmick, right? Just kind of pull people into the booth and really experience it. But it really started to get people thinking about, hey, wow, my kitchen can be that informative. All I need is that sort of screen, right? That way in which to communicate that information to me. So we got paid to prototype and ask the what if, which is really, really exciting. And I think when you start to do that, even in a sort of prototyping manner, you start to really realize that a lot of the technologies that we're using in the web and mobile are completely applicable. It's just really how we're thinking about behavior and how we're thinking about users are integrating and interacting with what it is that we're doing. So Kevin Kelly also coined this concept of codependency. We're going to reach a point, and we sort of already are. You look at our smartphones. We look at the Nest and anybody who has any kind of smart devices within their home. You start to, over time, behavior-wise, become dependent upon them. And the fact that they are just sort of there. If I need to check my email, I just pull it out. Ron's boring the crap out of me. I'm going to do this stuff over here. And there's this sort of sense that we're never really bored anymore because we're always fed the opportunity of information and become dependent upon that. Right? And as we become more and more dependent upon that, we have to really sort of rethink our notion of the interface in terms of more of this information becoming available in context with the actual user. And I think this is really, really cool. So I want to kind of conclude the presentation with this imaginary place. So kind of dream with me and go on this journey with me, if you will. So when we look at people as the interface and behavior as the design challenge, I think we have some major opportunities in the design and development world as we move forward and creating all the great things that we're creating. So let's take the kitchen, for example. Let's pretend this is my kitchen. And all of my cool devices are connected with each other. They're sending data up into the cloud, and they're all kind of communicating very happily and friendly with each other. And everything is really boiled down, and whether it's machine learning or whether it's just great database management, everything kind of understands what's happening within my family setting of the kitchen, right? Now, it also knows that, hypothetically, so say I work out, and I'll have a small gym upstairs, and I come down from the stairs into the kitchen, and it knows, because I have basically smart clothes, and it knows that my heart rate is elevated, it knows that I've been sort of moving at an unnormal rate for about 30 to 45 minutes. And it says, first suggestion that the fridge is going to make as I look over to it is I'm dehydrated. It's going to actually suggest 32 ounces of water to sort of get me back into place. Now, we have this term progressive enhancement. We look in sort of the web development terms of as I move through a specific experience, it progressively gives me more information. And I see that as a total translation into sort of physical spaces and behavior. So as I move closer to that refrigerator, it's going to give me more information. One, because I'm not so far away that I can't really read it, but as I get closer, my screen real estate stays the same, but my ability to see more information becomes better, right? I'm closer to it, so I can sort of get more without straining my eyes. So the more information here, it says about 35 minutes to suggest for me to cool down before I do anything crazy. And it realizes that by remembering what I ate for breakfast and maybe snack, it's monitoring my caloric intake. So it says about I have 1,000 calories I've consumed today. I've deplenished a little bit in my routine, and it's going to suggest a specific food option for me that will sort of really manage the best health or the optimal healthy state of my being, I guess, or my establishment. So, wait a minute. What is it saying here? 3 ounces of salmon and a half cup of cottage cheese. Like that doesn't sound really good to me right now. So Alexa's in the room. I say, hey, Alexa, I really don't want this. Give me a strawberry smoothie. And like, okay, no problem. Hey, it's a good thing. I'm pretending like I'm Alexa now. It's a good thing, Ron, that I recognize you didn't have strawberries in the fridge, so I submitted an automatic order to Amazon, and the drone flew over and dropped some strawberries in your icebox. So you need to go out and go get them real quick if you want that strawberry smoothie. I was like, great. So I go and get that. bring it over to the stove here, pull out a couple of things, and I realized just a quick check that what weather is, I don't know. We're in an imaginary journey here, and I have some options to where I can select. Do I need instruction on how to make this specific beverage, right? I think about 2.5 years ago, Frog Design was an industrial design firm, an amazing company, had put out a release or sort of blog that they were working on a light bulb that also acted as a projector. So I'm imagining a kitchen. Maybe there's Xbox cameras like mounted all in the ceiling, so it understands my movement and proximity, right? Alexa I can communicate with, and that can actually respond and react to control some of the things that are happening within the kitchen. And every light bulb in my kitchen is potentially a projector, right? Which is kind of phenomenal to think about. If every light bulb in your house could project information, how could that change or influence how you might live and work within your home? Right? So that projector over my stove projects down onto the cutting board the exact ingredients that I need. It may actually outline a grid system so that I cut my strawberries perfectly, and all these really, really amazing things. It also suggests a specific thing, because I'm a vegetarian, that I need some soy protein powder. We do have that in the kitchen because it knows. Third cup cottage cheese. I'm not a fan of cottage cheese. I might substitute that with Greek yogurt if we have it. So I can make some of these real-time decisions while it's still approximating the amount of ingredients that I need per that serving size. Now you notice at the bottom there's these cool little icons. Hopefully you can see it. It's projected, so it's not good design here, right? We need more contrast. But I'm the skull and crossbones because I'm kind of a badass, and I don't want to feel too Martha Stewart in this whole experience. But at the bottom right, I've got this cool new little icon that's popped up, because the cameras in the ceiling recognize that my 5-year-old son just walked into the kitchen. And based on machine learning and sort of best practices, that chances are my son's going to want to eat the same thing that I'm eating. So it doubles the actual amount in the ingredients in real time, and it instructs me to actually double my recipe, because it's trying to manage the caloric intake of both not only me, but also my son, who has different needs. So it's really, really all kind of fascinating. And before I kind of conclude, there was my wife is a physician at a cancer institute in Charlotte, North Carolina, and she sort of reads all these sort of journal articles and stuff, and there's this medical journal that came out that said that the life expectancy of our children, and maybe this is just an American thing, which I wouldn't deny, is shorter than our own. And this is a very profound thing. So this is the first time in history where, because of childhood diabetes and lack of exercise and some of these real issues in health, that we have some real concerns about the next generation coming up, right? So for me, it's why are we doing these things? Because it's cool and interesting, or fancy and futuristic. But no, it gives us, if we start to speculate and really start to think about and have the opportunity to explore what if and what is possible, and try to make these connections in really meaningful ways, I think we can all be empowered to make something better, right? So this is sort of the ultimate, not the robot taking over, but how can we really use our skill sets and knowledge and passion to make something really cool and different. I'm here because of the gracious sponsorship of CodePench. So this is a little plug here, and I do apologize for that. But if you are developing in WordPress and you're not necessarily interested in fixing all those really wonderful PHP errors, this is an Automagical tool plugin that you can add to your system that will give you weekly reports, daily reports, and automatically fix a lot of those errors. It's a really amazing tool, already 34,000 downloads, fantastic. You get a little sticker in your goodie bag, go to that URL. If you want $5 credit for free fixes, it's free to download, and it's free monitoring, and we hope in the future to see rollouts into Drupal and some other platforms. So please check it out and use that promo code. Be good. Thank you once again for hearing my passions of rant, and I guess we have time for questions. Sure? No? Yeah? So open up for questions. Yeah?
I don't know if it was on purpose, the focus of your talk, but it seems to be kind of in the virtual and augmented reality ecosystem that most of these things that they're coming up with seem to be focused on visual. Information is easier to
understand.
Visually.
Yeah.
But not only for accessibility, but in general, there's other ways to capture information. Why
the quick answer is that I'm a graphic designer at heart, so I like to do pretty pictures and stuff. So to me, that helps me visualize ideas. But I think that there's a very real conversation, and I'm sorry, the question. Let me repeat the question. It was about we see accessibility issues. A lot of my presentation was about the future of really the visual side of AR engagement and virtual engagement. And I don't necessarily think that's the case. I think that there's the invisible interface. There is this, that really the non-existent interfaces, the passive interactions that we can gain by just walking around an environment and maybe Alexa talking to us, or just in my behavior with smart clothing, that whatever needs I might have just automatically happens without me prompting. I think is a huge part of how IoT in the future of this will work. Ultimately, it becomes a thing where it just happens that I don't even think that's happening, right? I think that we're going to see more of that adoption pretty quickly. We see that in what cars are doing now, not just self-driving cars, but the fact that if I veer off a lane, the car will automatically adjust for me. And we'll become so used to that I'm not providing any input. There's no visual feedback. It's just doing what it needs to do to keep me safe. So I think walking around a kitchen with all of these sort of minority port visual displays flying around might get quite annoying for a lot of people, and I get that. But sort of informational graphics about how to cook something might be very helpful, right? So I think it's contextual, and it's probably based on user preference of what makes the most sense. And advertising, Campbell's Soup may want to throw an ad in, and that pays for the whole system to happen. Who knows what drives some of those factors? But that's a really good question. 10 more minutes. Any other questions? It is almost 11, which is, yeah.
I really like your slides. I was wondering how you made them. What tools are you using?
How I made my slides. Pretty pictures. Photoshop, Keynote. What, a slide in particular, or?
Just like the video overlay, how you integrated it all. I was wondering what software you're using to run it.
Keynote's amazing. It pretty much gives you freedom to do a lot of different things. Keynote's probably my primary tool because I speak a lot and I do a lot of pitch work and come up with ideas. So it allows me to generate things pretty quickly and reuse things. A lot of the motion and movement is either video or rendered stuff out of After Effects, and it kind of adds a little bit of flavor to things. But that's an interesting question. Yeah.
Curious if during the sort of demo you had set up, if there was any response to it sort of feeling creepy by people, if that ever kind of came up.
The kitchen?
Yeah.
Yeah, I gave this presentation actually 2 years ago, which is crazy that some of it's still relevant today. And the first thing was, I will never have cameras in my ceiling. And I think we had this great dialogue. A couple of the speakers went out to dinner last night. 2 guys from Google who are you guys here? They're doing a lot of the voice stuff at Google, which is mind-blowing. But it's a generational thing, right? So we're used to living in a time when these things don't exist. And as our kids grow up, and my wife and I are actually debating, should we buy Alexa, which is, you guys familiar with Amazon's tool? What happens when our kids grow up in a house that can talk to them and they can talk back to the house, right? This is very interesting in terms of behavior and how we live. But if they grow up only knowing that they can talk to their house, and that's the world that they grow up in, they wouldn't know any different. So if they grow up in a house that has cameras, they wouldn't know any different. So why would that be an issue or privacy concern for them? So I think we have to be good stewards of that to say, oh, let's just put cameras and it'll be fine. I think that there's this interesting tightrope that we have to walk as we move in, just in the next 5 years, next 10 years, of how we mediate that concern. It's going to happen. It is happening. And we hope, we put our faith in these big companies, Google and Amazon, that they're smart about it and that we are conscious of personal preference and privacy. But I think eventually it will become such a convenience for people that we will, like our iPhones, like everything that the security that we've already given away, it will only become more so because that convenience will outweigh everything else. That's my opinion. But I think these conversations are really important, specifically with this audience, because we're the people making it. Ultimately, we're the people creating this stuff. And so we are on the front lines of saying, wait a minute, what if, or why? Again, we're here, because I need a job. It's probably one thing, but yeah. Yeah.
Keep everything running, and as this level of integration gets higher and higher and higher, it's pretty clear we have to get to a different level of the kind of code that we write that's going to run more continuously. Because using today's technology and that image that you showed there, I'm thinking about all the stuff I have to reboot every week.
Yeah.
Replacing my refrigerator filter, all of that kind of stuff. And I'm interested in your thoughts around what has to happen with the technology.
I think it will happen fairly fast, so 5 more minutes. I think that there's a lot of, because you're talking, so you build and launch, and then there's a maintain, right? And you see this a lot in the software service industry, where build and launch is great, especially working an agile model, but the cost and the longevity is in maintaining that element. So I think we're going to start to see, when we build a new home, we're going to engage in companies that provide warranty policies for us, a monthly service fee subscription in which somebody comes out and maintains those things for us. There is kind of there's a DIY culture, I think, is us, and then there's everyone else, where those type of services are going to emerge. We're going to start to see a lot of companies who will be able to come out and fix those issues fairly quickly, or make a replacement because I have a subscription, $15 a month, to keeping my home up to snuff, right? So I think that's going to be the model, and I think that's a very big opportunity. We talk about opportunities and behaviors, a big business opportunity there as we move forward. But just like anything, you got a warranty on your car, something breaks, you go. And the cars are becoming so advanced now. I mean, it's crazy to service them. Yeah.
What's your feeling on interface design, where this type of interface is a lot of suggestive interface?
Right.
It's offering you, please do this. This is a good idea. What's your feeling on interface design where we purposefully ignore the suggestions? Like the recipe comes up and I ignore what the recipe says. And how does that feedback play?
For me, it's why I gave you some examples of the proximity. I feel like proximity is probably the number one input that we can play with right now. If I start to walk away, it gets it. Okay, he's not interested. And if I come back in a reasonable amount of time, then it will display the thing that I left. Right, because it can make an assumption that maybe I walked away to kind of wash my hands and come back. But if I leave for 5 minutes and come back, okay, maybe the kid has a diaper change that I got to deal with, and I just talk to Alexa to bring it back up. But I think proximity will be the key trigger. I don't know all of those answers, which is really exciting for me. It's like, wow, there's so many of these interesting questions that as you just do, I'm just playing here, right? But as you just do these things, you come up with all of these if-else statements, these scenarios where it's like, okay, what happens if somebody does this or that? What should I do? What is meaningful to that person? And not annoying, Another question? We out of time? We're out of time. So thank you all for coming. I know you have your options of speaking this morning, and it's great to share. Thanks.